Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is David Cashman. I work at SEB Housing, and this is the information session for Millside at Heritage Park in Canton, Massachusetts. And specifically, we'll be talking about the 15 affordable units there this evening. Before I go further, let me just make sure that there aren't any technical issues, make sure everyone can hear me. Related to that, anyone tuning in on YouTube, that's terrific. If you have questions or anything you want to communicate to me, you can email, you can type in that question in the sidebar to the right of where you see me. So let me just type something in there now, and if someone could just confirm that they can hear me okay, that would be great. Okay, so I've typed in the question, just waiting for confirmation. And as I'm waiting, I'll just say that there are a number of folks, it looks like, who are Catherine. Okay, great. Thank you, Catherine. Appreciate it. So we have a couple folks watching on the YouTube, which is great. And then there's at least one household on the call. So I'll be doing my best to address all of you. If at any time anyone has a question, please feel free to let me know and I'll stop and try and address it. The purpose of this evening is to give you a little bit more information about what this opportunity is, what the qualifications are, what the lottery is going to look like, and kind of what to expect going forward. Before I do that, let me just take a minute to kind of introduce myself. So SEB Housing, which is the company that I work for, is not the developer, which is Arista Development. Nor are we the management team, which is Corcoran Management, okay? We are an off-site affordable housing consultant, and we've been hired by the development team to assist them in this process because there are a lot of rules and regulations and things that you have to do when marketing affordable units and when qualifying applicants for those units. So we're here to assist them with that. So what that means is we're not on site. We're located in Needham, or usually right now everyone's remote still, and so there will be more than just us in this process that you'll be interacting with. But in the initial stage, in sort of step one in this process, which is applying, determining whether you're eligible, and then ultimately running the lottery, your main and probably only point of contact is going to be SEB Housing. So if you have questions about how to apply, or if you have questions about anything in the application materials, we're going to be your source of information for that to guide you along. But then after the lottery, that's when the management team, corporate management's going to kind of get involved and start working with eligible lottery households in the next step of the process, which is to apply for a lease. And that's something we'll talk a little bit more about later. You have to kind of distinguish two types of eligibility here. One, being program eligible, okay, being eligible for the affordable housing program, which is what SEB is brought on to assist with, which is different from being lease eligible, which SEB Housing really doesn't have anything to do with. That's something that will be determined by the management team after the lottery, okay? So let's just start by talking about what these units are, a little bit about the development. I apologize, I can't speak with firsthand experience about the development because I'm not on site, but let me just give you some of the details that I've been provided and what I've gleaned from their website. And then from there, we'll start talking about the eligibility requirements, and we'll kind of move on to the lottery and then post-lottery. And actually, just quickly, if you haven't already, our website is www.sebhousing.com. You can go on our website in the affordable housing opportunities. You can find this opportunity, Millside at Heritage Park. Click on the link. The information packet and the application are available there for download. So if you're interested and wondering probably what the fastest way is to access the application is, you can find it right there. If that doesn't work for you for whatever reason, you don't have a computer, you don't have internet, you can always contact us and we'd be happy to send you one. So in total, this development is going to have 60 units. I understand it sits on the site of the former Paul Revere copper factory, so it's got this sort of nice historical context. Of those 60 affordable rental units, there will be 15 units made available through this process, and units are going to start being ready this summer, so within a few months and shortly after the lottery. All affordable apartments will be rented to households with incomes at or below 80% of the area median income. Area median income is a concept that's created by HUD, and every year HUD publishes area median income limits, and they do it every year in April, and they change every year. There are geographic areas all over the country, and including various ones in Massachusetts. Canton happens to be part of the Boston, Cambridge, Quincy geographic area, so HUD publishes income limits for that area, which are the income limits we use in determining eligibility for this program. The affordable units will have high-end finishes and free parking on site. The finishes will include stainless steel appliances, quartz countertops, vinyl plank flooring, and carpeting in the bedrooms. Units will have washers and dryers. There are various amenities at this property consistent with a new upscale rental development, including workspace, a fitness room, access to a clubhouse, and an in-ground pool. I understand that there are nice sort of green areas on the property. There are public parks, there are walking trails, there's a river walk, and this is also a very convenient site. Probably some of you watching know it better than I do. It is very close to I-95 and I-93, and I understand close to commuter rail stations, so commuter friendly. There's also a restaurant on site. The 15 affordable units will be broken down in a mix of one-bedroom units and two-bedroom units. There will be 6 one-bedroom units. They have 1 bathroom. They're a little under 1,000 square feet. One of those units has features built out for people with hearing impairment, and another has features built out for persons with mobility impairments. And anyone needing those special features would need to disclose that on their application, demonstrate that they need those features, and they would get priority for those units as compared to any household who does not need those features. The rent for a one-bedroom apartment is $1,823 per month. There will also be 9 two-bedroom units that have 2 bathrooms. Those are approximately 1,200 square feet, and the rent for those is $2,008 per month. Now, those rents do not include utilities. The utilities are electricity, that's heating, hot water, and cooking, or all electric in general, nor does it include water or sewer. So your ultimate monthly fees will be higher than what I've just mentioned when you include those utilities. As I said before, though, there is free parking included in the rent. Pets are allowed for any pet owners. And those rents, I should say as well, do not fluctuate according to a household's financial picture. So the rents are the rents. They get set according to the income limits that HUD publishes. So, if one household applying makes even, let's say, $10,000 more than a different household that's applying, that does not impact the rent. The rent is the rent. Michelle Sadaka, you're asking, are there any one-bedroom with dens available as part of the lottery? That's a good question. I have to go back through my notes, and that might take me a minute to figure out. So if you don't mind, I'd like to put that question on hold, and then once I've kind of gone through the presentation, I can circle back and see if I can find that information. I just don't have it at my fingertips. And ultimately, if I can't find it, I'll be happy to get your email and follow up with you that way. I'm sorry, I don't know it off the top of my head. Let's talk about the eligibility requirements, okay? And so we're still kind of in step one of this process, which is, what is this? How do I apply? How am I eligible getting up to the lottery? So in order to qualify for an affordable unit, households must have income and assets under certain parameters as outlined by the program. At least one member of the household must be at least 55 years of age. Household priority for the 2-bedroom units will be given to larger household sizes who need 2 bedrooms, and we'll talk a little bit about that and how you'll fill that out when you complete the application. Households cannot own a home upon move-in. Okay, and let me just say that it's okay if you own a home right now. That's not a disqualifier. You would need to provide documentation about the value of the home and what your equity in the home is, but you can still apply as a current homeowner. However, the home would need to be sold before you could sign a lease for a unit. And so if that applies to anyone, if you're otherwise eligible, you would get a notice from us that says you're conditionally eligible. You've met all the criteria. We've looked at your income. We've looked at your assets. We've looked at your taxes. You meet all the criteria. The only issue is that you still own a home. And so your ability to move forward is conditional upon the sale of that home. And you would have to provide documentation, closing disclosure statement before you could sign a lease. And then finally, households or anyone in the any part of the household cannot have a financial interest in the development. I don't believe that's something that's come up in my experience. I'm not saying it hasn't happened, but if you have some financial interest in this development, if you're an investor or something like that, you would need to disclose that. That would disqualify you on the grounds that it could create an appearance of impropriety, an appearance that you'd be getting special treatment, and the program doesn't allow that. Additionally, households cannot be considered a related party. So if you are related to someone who works for Arista Development or corporate management, you would need to disclose that. Depending on who that is, that may very well be a disqualifying factor. And also, the program administrator includes in the definition of related party employees. So anyone who may work for Arista Development or who may work for corporate management would also be considered a related party, and that would be a disqualifying factor. Let's talk about income, and that's really probably the biggest sort of criteria that we'll talk about. So this program has maximum income limits that determine eligibility. That probably doesn't come as a surprise. It's affordable housing. The rents are being set at rates that are below what they are on the market rate. And so it stands to reason that someone making $1 million is not an eligible applicant for this opportunity. So let's talk about what the maximum income limits are. And these are broken down by household size, the number of persons in the household. So these will change, right? It'll be different for one person. It'll be different for 2 people than it is for 3 people, than it is for 4 people, okay? And these income limits are gross income, okay? Gross income, not net. So we're not talking about after taxes or deductions or after, you put money in your 401k through work or anything like that. It's the gross income. You don't have to memorize these. You don't have to jot it down real quickly. It's clearly in the information packet in several places. It's in the ad. It's on our website. It's in the information packet application. So you can just find it there. But for a household size of 1, it's $70,750. For a household size of 2, it's $80,850. For a household size of 3, it's $90,950. And for a household size of 4, it's $101,050. Again, those change every year. So next April in 2022, those will change again, and then they'll change in 2023. Typically, they go up, not always, but especially in this area, they have gone up sort of markedly so over the last 2 or 3 years, and that's part of a trajectory which has generally gone up over the last decade, I would say. Income, let's also say, includes everyone in the household. So that's everyone who would be on the lease, and it's everyone who would be occupying the unit as their primary residence, whether on the lease or not. So if there's let's say a couple and they have their kid, and the kid's not going to be listed on the lease, but would be living there for a dominant portion of the year, that kid would be included in the household and would need to be included on the application that you submit to get into the lottery. This one comes up sometimes too. It bears mentioning that legally married couples are both considered part of the household, even if separated. So sometimes households will say, my partner and I have been separated or estranged for 10 years or 15 years. We don't live together. We don't speak. We don't do anything. But they've never actually effectuated a divorce. On paper in a court of law, they're still married, okay? And that partner, in that case, since they're still married, would need to be included on the application. And that obviously really stinks if you have no intention of actually moving forward with that person. And by the way, good luck getting them to submit all of their income and asset documentation for an opportunity that they're not interested in. Related to that, if you are in the process of making a divorce happen, it hasn't been finalized yet, you can apply, and in that case, you would not need to include all of the spouse's income and asset and tax documentation. However, the divorce would need to be finalized by the time the lottery is run so that we can determine the final division of assets and income and alimony and all of those things to determine eligibility. So there will be some of this time sensitivity, and similar to a household that owns a home, a household who is in the process of going through a divorce would get a conditional application if they're otherwise eligible that says you've met all these other criteria, but you're in the midst of this divorce. It hasn't been finalized. We will ultimately need it to be finalized by the time the lottery is run so we can assess final eligibility. Another note is even though a household, we're looking at the incomes of all household members, but there is an exception for minors under the age of 18. Any income they have from a job, does not get counted. If you have a 17-year-old that has a trust fund and gets regular distributions from the trust fund, that's not a job, that is income that would be included. Okay, so under the age of 18, working has a job, we're not interested, we're not counting their income. But under the age of 18, getting distributions or income from some other source, that would need to be disclosed, that would need to be factored in. The other exception to the general rule that we're counting all sources of income for household members is full-time students who are dependents. So if there is a dependent child who's in school full-time, you've got the documentation to show that they're registered on a full-time schedule and that they are in fact your child. We are not counting anything above $480, which is sort of a random number, but that's the number. So if they make $10,000, we count 480. If they make $15,000, we count 480, and so on and so forth. Income also is defined pretty expansively in this program. Okay, so if you haven't looked at the application yet, but you will, you'll see. And we've given a lot of examples of various sources of income that count. And you want to take your time looking through the income table and make sure that you're accounting for all of those, because the reality is even if you miss something or you kind of decide maybe you want to not tell us about it, which we hope you don't do, but it usually shows up somewhere else in your bank statements and other places, things that you're going to have to show. So better off just take your time, go through that carefully, and make sure you list everything. It's actually disappointing to you if you kind of honestly forget about something. You say, my income from my job that I work 40 hours per week that I've had for the last 5 years is X. Great, I'm under the income limits, I qualify. oh, darn it, I forgot that, I also have this part-time business on the side. It's kind of sporadic. I don't do it that often, but I do it, and I do make money doing it, and I've made money in the last year. And, well, that money counts, and I have to include that in addition to the money you make at your job. So that'd be disappointing, but that's part of the point of the table that we provide in the application, is to kind of help prompt you and remind you of some of these various sources of income that do get included. You can also include things like child support or alimony. So if you're receiving that income source, that's income has to be included. If you receive Social Security income or Social Security disability income, that is included. If you have a retirement account or pension and you're drawing down from regularly, you get distributions twice a month or once a month, that would count as income. Unemployment, that one seems a little surprising sometimes, but in this program, regular unemployment does count as income. Some of the federal stuff, the pandemic related stuff, does not, but your regular Massachusetts based unemployment money is income. Another one that kind of surprises people that comes up sometimes is periodic payments, like gifts on a regular or recurring basis. Great if you have a family member or friend who's helping and supports you with, let's say, every month, gives you a check for a blank amount to help with some of life's costs, or twice a month. That would count as income. Usually those show up in a bank statement, and so we'd see it there, and we can see that it's not tied to your the job that you have, and but it's twice every month. There's a deposit of X amount, and then we say, well, what's that money? And you say, oh, I have a family member who gives me this money every twice a month. That's going to count as income. Another one that can happen is maybe you have an asset that generates income. Bank accounts, they don't usually generate a whole lot, but sometimes they can. That also gets counted. Now, the specifics on the particular documents that you have to provide is listed in the application. Hopefully it's pretty self-explanatory. It's probably takes too much time to kind of go through now, and not all of it will be applicable to anyone watching. So it probably makes sense for you to just take time and go through the application. And obviously, if you have questions, you can let us know. But you're going to have to provide things like your 5 most recent consecutive pay stubs. So if that's once a week, you're going to have to go back the last 5 weeks. If it's once every 2 weeks, you're going to have to go back the last 2.5 months, or whatever the applicable pay period is. You'd have to provide the 5 most recent ones. If you had a job that shows up on your last year of taxes, but you're not working there anymore, you're going to have to provide documentation so we know you're not working there anymore. And we provide examples of the different ways that you can demonstrate that. If you get Social Security or SSDI or pension or anything like that, you're going to have to provide copies of the recent statements from that source for every household member over the age of 18. Joel Skolnick, do capital gains count as income? That would be, I might have to run that by our processing team. I don't do the application processing myself, so I think they do. I'm pretty sure they do. But before I say that definitively, I'd want to run it by someone who one of the application processors who does this work for us. So Joel, after I finish, let me get your email. I will follow up, because I don't want to tell you definitively yes. I think it's yes. I just want to make sure I get you a confident answer on that one. So remind me when this is over. I'll get your email. I'll follow up with you to make sure. Okay, so again, hopefully those explanations in the application will be clear, but if not, you can always reach out. So there's maximum income that is defined by the program. The program has no minimum income limits. Okay, there's no minimum income governed by the program. That being said, the expectation in this program is that you are able to, or the expectation in this program and from the management team is that you'll be able to support the rent on the strength of your own income and assets. And so for that reason, we do sort of a preliminary minimum income screening for them to make sure that households that we're passing along through the lottery are likely households that are going to be able to meet their lease screening criteria. If you recall from the beginning, I mentioned that there's kind of these two different criteria. There's the program criteria, which is what SEB Housing is assessing, but there are also lease eligibility criteria, which we don't assess. That's governed by the management team. So the management team has told us that for all applicants, whether affordable or market rate, the applicant's income must be approximately 2.5 times the monthly rent. Now, this, if you have a voucher, this does not apply to you, so you can disregard what I've said on this and what I'm about to say if you have a voucher. But if you don't have a voucher, this would apply. So you have to make approximately 2.5 times the monthly rent in income, and we can also look at assets. So if you don't quite have it based on your income, but if you do have money that you can draw down from an asset, we could look at that and factor that any deficiency there. What is that for a 1-bedroom unit, a household would have to make about $55,000, and for a 2-bedroom unit, a household would have to make about $60,000 to demonstrate to the management team that they're going to be able to afford the rent on the strength of their own income and assets. So one way you can think about this is that this program sort of caters to a window or a slice of the population where households make above these minimum amounts that are put in place by the management team, but they are under the maximum program amounts, right? So you've kind of got this window of eligibility for households. It bears mentioning that since the minimum income and assets, this is not a program requirement. SEB is just looking at it to make sure that we're not passing on households who are never going to meet the management team's criteria. So what that means is if it's close, we're not going to be the ones to tell you, sorry, you don't qualify. We're not going to move you forward, right? If it's close enough, we'll say, okay. That's different from the maximum program income limits where we do have to look at it very closely. And even if you are a little bit over, we'll have to tell you that unfortunately you do not qualify. I do want to say as well that in general, the general rule in this program when looking at income is that we have to assume that households will continue to receive or earn monies that they've been earning or receiving, unless there's like a documented pattern demonstrating otherwise. So sometimes for seasonal employees, like maybe someone lives down in, Martha's Vineyard or something, and they always work, in the summer months and the shoulder seasons, they make X amount, and then, things kind of stop for the winter, and then that cycle repeats and it repeats. In that case, we can kind of consider that historical context. It would be, and we would not have to extrapolate from the 8 months where things are really active, they're really hot, they're doing well, and say we're going to assume the same thing will happen for the other 4 months. We have a documented history that in the 4 winter months they don't work or the income goes way down. But for households who don't fall into that, sometimes households will say, well, yeah, I make $70,000 now, but I've been working overtime, or I just had a good year, and I think it's going to go down in 5 months from now, and so you should count what I think I'm going to make in 5 months from now, which is less than today. And generally in those circumstances, if there's no documented pattern of that, this is just sort of a future, a guess or idea about what's going to happen. We cannot assume that it will go down. There's no documented history of that. Okay, so we can talk. I'm going to sort of wrap it up there with respect to income. There's a lot we could say about income, but there's a lot in the informational materials and in the application. So take a look. if you end up having any questions, you can let us know. Oftentimes households don't know exactly what their questions may be until they get in and start filling it out, and then they think, oh, yep, what about this or what about that? So let me wrap up there and turn now to assets. And the thing about assets is that there's no limit, actually. Okay, there's no limit for the number of amount you can have in assets. So you could have quite a bit in assets. It's not going to kick you over any limit. That's different from income. You could have quite a hefty amount in the bank account or in a retirement fund. That's okay. This program allows that for rental. You do still need to disclose what those assets are. So please don't take what I've said as indication that you don't, since there's no limit, you don't really have to show us what your assets are. I'm not saying that at all. And assets like income can be varied. People have all types of different assets. So it can include things like your bank accounts, and most people have that. So you'll have to provide the most recent statements from your checking account or your savings account. Make sure you get the full printout with the full account number on there and everything. In this day and age, a lot of people, I know myself included, use some of these applications that sort of act almost like bank accounts. So Venmo and PayPal, and I front the money to a friend, and then they send me some money in Venmo, and it sits in my Venmo account. I forget it's even there until I go pay someone else from Venmo, and then it goes back out. That counts. That counts as an asset. You could have retirement accounts, even if you're not drawing on it, you're not planning on accessing it for 5 or 10 more years. That still counts. You'd have to list what the net cash value is. There may be a penalty if you're under a certain age and you're not looking to access it soon. We understand that, but the fact that you may not be looking to access it and that there's a penalty doesn't technically mean that you can't. It doesn't technically mean that it's not yours. And so we would count that. Again, no asset limit. We just need to know what the assets are. You could have mutual funds, stocks, bonds, etc. Real estate, that's a big one. Obviously, that's usually one of the biggest ones, the most valuable asset many people have. You can apply as the owner of a home. That's okay. But you cannot own a home at the time you go to sign a lease. So the house would need to be sold before you can sign a lease. And like I said before, if you're otherwise eligible, but you currently own a home, you would get a conditional letter of eligibility saying that you're otherwise eligible, except for the fact that you need to sell the home, so that we will need to see that before you can sign a lease. Okay, so, and there is an asset table in the application. So, just take your time going through that, same as the income table. That will cue you in. Perhaps you may have, usually when we think of assets, it pretty quickly comes to mind, well, what I have in my bank account. Unlikely to overlook that one, but maybe you forget that you use Venmo and, or PayPal or one of these other ones. So take a look closely at the asset table to help remind you of anything that you may be possibly overlooking. I recognize the screen is pretty blurry, everyone, and I'm sorry. I don't know why that is. I'm trying to ignore it, but I recognize it may be kind of distracting. I'm going to just see if I can clear it up a little bit. So hold on one second. I don't know if that made it any better. All right. Well, I'm sorry. I'm not sure there's a fix I can make on the fly, but thanks for your patience. And I'm sorry. I know the picture is pretty bad here. Okay. So that's a little bit about income and assets. I want to touch on a couple points here when you fill out the application. One of the questions will ask you, what bedroom size are you applying for? 1 bedroom or 2 bedroom? You can apply for both. You can apply for either. You can apply for both. And what I always tell households about this is there's really not a whole lot of downside to applying for both. The worst thing that can happen is, well, maybe you're not eligible for a 2 bedroom, but you are for a 1 bedroom. Okay, fine. You tried. That's fine. Or you're eligible for both. Great. Put you in the lottery. At some point, you may have a decision to make. Maybe you'll be invited forward on both for both opportunities, and you'll just have to decide which one do I want. Well, that's not so bad. But the converse of that is if you only list that you want a 1-bedroom, and then later you change your mind once we've run the lottery, and you say, "Ooh, I've changed my mind. I wish I could be on the 2-bedroom." We can't sort of like retroactively put you back in on the 2-bedroom list. We can kind of put you on the bottom of it, but now you've kind of lost your advantage as a lottery household. So anyway, moral of the story is, there's really little downside to checking off both, and there's some but there can be a downside of not checking off both if you think you could be interested in both. There will be another question about, and I'm just picking a couple here that I wanted to highlight. I'm obviously not touching on everything in the application, which is long. There's a question about household type. You could be a type 2 household or a type 1 household. I don't need to explain what those are because we give you check boxes that list here are the various compositions that could constitute a type 2 household. And then we give check boxes that say, here are the various compositions that could constitute a type 1 household. You just go and pick the one that applies to you. So if you're a 4-person household, you're going to be a type 2, you check that box. But you may be asking, like, well, what does that mean? What is the relevance of that? And the relevance is that in this program for the 2-bedroom units, we have to give priority in the lottery to larger households who need both bedrooms, as contrasted to households who are smaller, maybe a 1-person household who might like both 2 bedrooms, but who doesn't need 2 bedrooms. And so in a little bit, when I talk about the lottery and the waiting list, I'll kind of flesh that out a little bit more. But in short, the distinction and the relevance there is that type 2 households are going to have priority for 2-bedroom units because they need 2 bedrooms. Okay. Make sure that if you're in need of an accessible or hearing impaired unit, that you check that off so that you get priority for those units. There is a question on local preference because there is a local preference in this lottery. What is local preference? Okay. Hopefully you don't hear that and think I have to be a resident of the town of Canton or I can't apply. Not true. Okay. Not true. You do not have to be a resident of the town of Canton. You can be a resident of California or anywhere else. You can still apply. All this means is that for some of the units, households who qualify for local preference will be higher on the waiting list than households who don't qualify for local preference. What is local preference? Well, it includes 4 categories. It includes households who live in Canton. That's probably the first thing that comes to mind. Households who work for a business located in Canton, or who work for the town of Canton, or who have children attending the Canton schools. Okay, so if you meet one of those criteria, that means you're eligible for local preference. That means that for some, but not all of the units, you will get a higher waiting list position than a household who doesn't qualify for local preference. And that's what it means. If you're listening to this and saying, well, I don't meet any of those criteria, and therefore, I don't qualify for local preference, should I not bother? The answer to that is absolutely not. Okay, absolutely not. You should absolutely still bother. You should absolutely still fill out an application if you're interested, because even, we do many lotteries. We do many lotteries that have a local preference component. And even households that don't qualify for local preference very often still get an opportunity to move forward. So if you don't qualify, still submit an application. You should. There is a question on race in the application. If anyone's wondering, well, why is that there? What's the relevance of that? When we do local preference, we have to make sure that there are enough minorities in the local preference drawing that are equal to or exceed the percentage of minorities in the surrounding area. Okay, so if there are, 10 households in the lottery who say that they're eligible, they qualify for local preference, and not one of them indicates they're a minority, but there are other minority households who apply who don't qualify for local preference, some of those minority non-local preference households will be given local preference through a preliminary drawing so that the percentage of minority households in the local preference drawing is equal to or greater than the surrounding area. Anyway, that's why that question's there, for that reason, to make sure that we have a sufficient representation of minority households in any local preference drawing. Okay. I talked for a second about household types, and it's just type 1 and type 2, and how households who are type 2 will get priority for a 2-bedroom unit. Some households may ask, well, if I'm type 1, can I even apply for a 2-bedroom unit? Yes, you can. You won't get priority, but you can still apply. You can apply for both. If you're interested in both, you should. Okay, so the application deadline is June 25th. I know that at current, if you're curious, there are 3 households who have submitted complete applications who are eligible. Okay, 3 right now. There are 15 total units, so there's still another month that usually things begin to pick up as we get closer to the deadline. But what that can tell you is that if you're eligible for the lottery, there's a pretty good chance that you're going to get an opportunity to move forward. And that's generally true. That's generally true in the lotteries we run, that if you're in the lottery, you have a good chance of moving forward. There are some households who have submitted applications that are incomplete. There are several of those who are still working on their applications. And that's a nice segue into just talking about get your application in early, because this is not a one bite at the apple type of scenario. It's not as if you submit an application, it's incomplete, and we say, that's it for you, you're done. If you submit an incomplete application, we'll just get back to you within a couple of days saying, here's exactly what's missing in bulleted format, and now you can work on getting those items. Michelle, to clarify, you review an application for eligibility as soon as you receive it. Correct. Usually we get back to applicants within 2 to 4 business days, depending on how busy we are. We're really busy, but we'll try and get back to you as quickly as we can. And when we get back to you, it's going to be one of 3 things. You're ineligible, okay, and here's why. You are eligible, or no, let me say, you're ineligible, you're incomplete, and here are the things that are missing in bulleted format, and you need to go get those, or you're eligible. And let me just say too, the application that you have to fill out it's exhaustive, okay? It's lengthy. I understand that, and I know that there's a lot of documentation that we ask for, and that's not just because we're voyeuristic and we want to look through all your stuff, or that we want to make this process unnecessarily hard. That's just what the program requires that we do. The vast majority of households do not submit a 100% complete application on the first try. They just overlook something. It happens. It's innocent. That's totally fine. But you want to get your application in as far in advance of the deadline as you can, because chances are yours may be incomplete, and you don't want to be racing around June 25th to go collect some other piece of documentation that's still missing. So get it in early so you can see exactly where you are, you can see what's missing, and you can go get that with some time. And let me say on that front too, even if you submit absolutely every single thing that's in the application, you're super diligent, you dot your I's, you cross your T's, it's all there according to what's requested in the application, there could still be something missing because maybe something that you submitted actually raises further questions. Case in point, you submit your checking or savings account statements as required, and we see all these deposits that go in regularly that are not tied to your job. And we have to ask, what are those deposits? Did you forget to tell us about a job? Oh, no, I didn't. I get money from this other source. Okay, well, we need to see some documentation about that. Okay, so that comes up with some frequency and just underscores the point of get your application in early so you have time to address that. If your application is complete and you're eligible, we'll send you a lottery application number. It'll be a letter. It'll be 2 pages. It has important information on it. It'll have your lottery application number that we'll use when we do the lottery drawing. That'll be in the form of A.blank blank blank. That number is merely an anonymous identifier to be used at the lottery. It has no bearing on where you kind of how you move forward or anything like that. So if you're the very first household to get us your completed application and are eligible, you'll be A.001. And that's it. That's just an anonymous identifier to use for you in the lottery. When you get that letter, give it a read over. It has the information. It repeats much of what you put in your application. You want to make sure it's correct. We try really hard to make sure it's accurate. Occasionally, something may get mixed up. And if it does, we'll fix it, but it's easier to fix, right then and there than at some point later. So if you applied as a type 2 household and you see, and we send you a lottery letter that says, hey, congratulations, you're eligible, you're A.005, and you applied for this type of unit and you're a type 1 household, you should say, oh, no, I'm not, I'm a type 2, let us know. Unlikely that happens. Every once in a while it does. So point is, when you get that letter, just give it a read, make sure that what's in there corresponds to what you think was in your application in terms of your household type, in terms of the bedroom sizes that you applied for, in terms of the members of your household that you listed in your application, whether you had local preference, whether you had a disability or a hearing impairment, and some of those things. Okay, so just give that a read. The lottery will be held on July 8th. It's still all remote. It'll be same as we're doing right here. These lotteries, if you haven't participated in an affordable housing lottery before, they're a little bit different than what we typically think of in lotteries, because typically when we think of lotteries, we think of winners and losers, or people will ask, well, am I going to get picked? Okay, and that's not how these work. The way these work is that every single household in the lottery will get picked. Okay, let me say it again. Every single household in the lottery will get picked. And I'll pick them out of a box. I'll pick the application numbers. I won't use your name, A.001, A.02, etc. I'll pick them out. I'll show them up on the screen so you can see. Okay, and then every single household will be on a waiting list. Okay, so you may be asking, well, what's a waiting list? Well, the lottery, we use the lottery drawing to create waiting lists, which establish an order of priority for moving on to the next step in the process, which is to apply for a lease with the leasing office. So this is how we sort of rank it according to the waiting list. And we use the lottery drawing to populate the waiting list, and we do it partly based on the order in which you're drawn, right? So were you drawn first, were you drawn second, were you drawn third, but not exclusively so, okay? Not exclusively so. So if you are the very first household whose number is drawn in the lottery, does that mean you're going to be number 1 on a waiting list? Well, the answer is maybe, maybe not. And in the moment that I draw it, you won't know that, and I actually won't know that either. And the reason we won't know that is because these drawings will have every single household who's in the lottery. Some of those households are not applying for the same bedroom types. Some are applying for 2 bedrooms, some are applying for 1 bedroom, some are applying for both. It'll have type 2 households, it'll have type 1 households, it'll have local preference households, it'll have non-local preference households. So you get these variations, okay? And for example, as I talked about before, for these 2-bedroom units, we have to give priority for larger household types who need all of the bedrooms. And so what that means is if you're a type 1 household applying for a 2-bedroom unit, even if you're the very, very first household drawn in the lottery, if there are other type 2 households, you're not going to be the top household on that waiting list. You're going to get skipped over by the type 2 households who need the 2-bedroom unit, okay? So we actually, in the information packet, take a look on page 12. We list out how we're going to create the waiting list using the lottery drawing. And for your purposes, I think what's maybe important to remember is, yes, it is still true that being picked earlier in the lottery is better than being picked later, but it's not the end-all be-all. And then after the lottery's run, I will use these different priorities, these different selection criteria to organize the waiting list, and then I will send them to you that night. If you have email, I will email it to you, so you get it within 2, maybe 3 hours of the lottery drawing, which would be at 6 p.m. And if you don't have email, I'll mail it to you, and then you'll get it in a couple days. And the waiting list that we send will be ordered top to bottom. Okay, so you'll see, all right, I'm A.004. I'm number 3 on the 2-bedroom waiting list. Okay, and maybe you'll be on both waiting lists if you applied for 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms and you were eligible for both. You'll have spots on both waiting lists. Okay. Now, the waiting list will then be used to kind of, they establish this order of priority for moving forward in the next step, which is to apply for a lease with the leasing office. As I mentioned, there are 15 affordable units out of 60 total. Those units have been reviewed and approved by the town and by the state. They are generally representative of the units in the building as a whole. And they are, spread out. They're in different parts of the building. They're not all stacked or clustered together. They're not identifiable as affordable units from the outside. The advantage of being higher on the waiting list is that, these units are not assigned, like according to where you are on the waiting list. So in other words, it's not as though the number 1 household on the 1-bedroom waiting list gets unit 100. And has no choice. That's just the unit. And then the number 2 household gets unit 200, right? That's not how it works. It's nice because you have some agency, you have some decision making over which unit you want, which is why being higher on the waiting list is really sort of advantageous. So, if you are the number 1 household on the 2-bedroom waiting list, you'll be able to select from any of the 9 2-bedroom units. So, we'll put you in touch with the leasing office. We'll give your information to them. We'll give their information to you. You're going to, be in touch with each other after the lottery. They're going to probably give you a timeline by when they want you to come in to apply for a lease, tour the building, look at the available units. I don't know if they can let you know. I'm not sure if they're doing in-person tours yet. Maybe it's by appointment. If not, they probably have something else set up in terms of virtual tours and stuff. They can let you know on that. But they'll be in touch with you to arrange a tour, and then you'll be able to see what are the available, affordable 2-bedroom units and which one do I want. And if you're number 1 on the 2-bedroom list, you pick the one you want, and off you go, assuming you're lease eligible. And so Joel, will income be based on 2020 tax returns or 2021 year to date? It's not really an either or. I mean, we're looking at your most recent pay stubs as probably our primary indicator of what you're likely to make going forward. But we're also looking at your 2020 tax returns, right, as some sort of historical documentation. And so if they're generally consistent, we're probably looking at 2021 and projecting forward from there. Now, sometimes weird things can happen that might require additional explanation. If you're in the same job and you made, 90,000 in 2020 and your 2021 is indicating 60,000, well, we may have to ask some additional questions and try and figure out really which is the more accurate indicator of what you're likely to make going forward. But I would say in general, we're considering both and using both to project income going forward. In general, we often have to kind of, I don't know if you want to say it, assume the worst or assume the best. Kind of depends on how you look at it. And by that, I mean, assume you will make, if there's sort of one of 2 options, like maybe you'll make X or maybe you'll make Y and Y is higher, we generally have to assume you'll continue to make Y. Unless there's something very clear that shows that X is actually the more accurate predictor. But that's the general rule. We have to, again, I don't know if you would call it assume the best. Making more money is good, but assume the worst in terms of maybe it put you over the income limits. But we're considering both. Going back to where I was. So you'll be invited to tour, and you can select from the available units. You'll have to complete a lease application. And again, this is where it's just very important to remind yourself or be cognizant of the fact that there's program eligibility, which was what we've talked about, which is what SEB does, right? And that if you're program eligible, we'll put you in the lottery. But that's different from lease eligibility, which we are not really looking at. So we are not, when you're applying for this program for the lottery, we're not asking you questions about your tenant history or your credit, or if you have some criminal background or anything like that, questions that leasing offices often ask. So, a household could be lease eligible, but not program eligible. A household could be program eligible, but not lease eligible. Here, you got to be both. And so if you're number one on a waiting list after the lottery, please don't go making definitive plans and telling your current landlord, hey, I'm number one on the list. I love this place. I'm moving out in a month, because maybe you'll apply for a lease and Corcoran will say, hey, we're really sorry. Your credit doesn't meet our criteria here, right? SE, we didn't look at that. We don't look at your credit. That's not part of program screening. So, I'm not saying don't get your hopes up at all, but just, be mindful that there is this other step in the process of being lease qualified, and you don't want to kind of, count your chickens before they hatch, so to speak, or make any plans that are too definitive until you've also been found lease eligible, and then you can probably, really start to kind of plan your next steps. And no co-signers or guarantors on the lease. You got to be able to qualify and meet the lease screening criteria on your own merits. Okay. I want to say, in this program, you do have to be eligible each year, right? So if you go through the lottery, you're eligible. You end up leasing a unit. That's terrific. You're there. And, but 10 months later, you're thinking, this is great. I want to keep living here for another year. Well, that's great. The program says you have to be requalified each year and to demonstrate that you maintain eligibility for the program. Now, the good news is you will have done it once, so there'd be some familiarity. You kind of know the routine, you know what's required. Not a bad idea to, if you like it there and you think you want to stay, you've applied before, you know the types of documents that are required. Start building a file through the year, right? Start just collecting some of those things that are going to be required, so that when it comes time to recertify, because you want to renew your lease, you got a file already built. You're not starting from scratch. The other thing is there's this cushion that's built in. And so the income limit for a household that's applying now as a brand new household is, let's say for a household size of 1, is about little under $71,000. That same household size of 1 in a year from now, right? If they love it and they want to stay and renew their lease, they can make up to about $99,000 and still be eligible. So there's almost, not quite, but almost a $30,000 cushion built in, which means, great, if you get a little bit of a pay bump or a raise, as long as it's not too big, you could still qualify and be eligible for a subsequent lease term. Now, those numbers change, okay? So they'll be a little bit different than what I just said right here. They'll change depending on the HUD numbers, but they'll probably be in that ballpark of what I just mentioned. All right, well, we've been talking for close to an hour. I think I've covered the big points that I want to cover. Like I said, and I know I owe a couple of you answers to questions that you asked here, so I'm going to wrap up in a sec here and start seeing if I can find you those answers, or I'll give you my information so I can follow up with you. But for any other households who aren't going to stick around for any Q&A, I think your big takeaway is if you haven't read the information packet, you should, because there's a lot of helpful information in there that will really kind of describe this process. I think we've done a good job of trying to answer a lot of the common questions that come up. If you're interested, get your application in early so you have time to address anything that may be missing. If you don't have those materials and you need them, you can reach out to us. I'm going to actually just type our general email right here on the screen, info@sebhousing.com, info@sebhousing.com. You can email us. We will be glad to send you those materials, or you can just get them right from our website. And you can download them and fill them out there. So that's what I want to leave you with. If there are other questions, please feel free to ask them. In the meantime, Michelle, let me go back and just see if I can find you that answer about units with dens. Let me see if I have that. And this might take me a second, so I apologize for the somewhat awkward silence, but all right. Well, Michelle, I think the answer is no, but why don't we do this? Here's my personal email. Why don't you shoot me an email? I can confirm with the developer. I think the answer is no, but before I tell you that definitively, let me confirm and make sure. So feel free to send me an email, and I'm happy to get back to you. And then Joel, let me just look real quick on your question about capital gains. And again, Joel, that's my email. If I can't get you that answer, I'll find someone who can. So just give me 1 second here. All right. You know what? I'm not sure, Joel. So do you mind, Joel, emailing me, and I'll run it by someone on our application processing team and get your firm answer if you don't mind. I appreciate your patience on that, and I'm sorry I don't know the answer, but I'm going to find it for you. So my email is there. Shoot me an email. I'll get you an answer within a few days. Any other questions? Any other questions? All right. Well, I hope this was helpful. I hope you got some information out of it. I appreciate everyone showing up. Get your application in early, and we hope to see it soon. Thank you for tuning in, and everyone have a great night. Good night.